I tried to stay calm, but there are times when a person's patience has its limits. Today, everything crossed that line. As a member of the community, I always made an effort to follow the rules, contribute to the development of the neighborhood. But what I received in return was nothing but an invasion of my privacy and a lack of respect from those who were supposed to lead the community, the very people I thought would understand and protect the rights of each resident. No one benefits when personal power is used to trample over others. And today's story is the result of an action that can no longer be tolerated. If you're interested in dramatic stories about power, corruption, and the battle to protect the community, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any updates. It was supposed to be just another peaceful morning, but no. Instead, I was rudely dragged out of my sleep by the sound of laughter, music, and an unmistakable scent of fresh flowers. Flowers? Seriously? I had no idea what was going on, and I certainly didn't plan any kind of party. As I rubbed my eyes and glanced out the window, I couldn't believe what I saw. My yard, my private land that I worked hard to maintain, was suddenly transformed into a full-blown wedding venue. White chairs lined the lawn, leading to a floral arch that looked more like a cheap wedding set from a low-budget movie. I was livid. This was my land. How could anyone think they had the right to take over my space without even asking me? My heart pounded in my chest as I stormed outside, boots crunching against the gravel. The sight of chefs in white uniforms preparing food near my barn only made me angrier. The whole scene screamed entitlement, and the person behind it? None other than Karen, the HOA president, who seemed to think that my land was her personal playground. As I walked toward the madness, my anger reached its peak. I couldn't believe this was happening. This had to be a mistake, right? Maybe they had the wrong house. Maybe some clueless event planner had messed up the location. But no. As I got closer, I saw a massive banner that read, "Welcome to the wedding of Rachel and David." Neither of those names meant anything to me. That's when I knew for sure this wasn't a mistake. This was pure Karen-style entitlement. Karen spotted me from across the yard and turned around with that fake, sugary smile of hers. "Oh, good morning, John," she chirped, waving a clipboard like she was some kind of benevolent event planner. "Isn't it just gorgeous? The community is going to love this." I stood there, dumbfounded. "Karen, what the hell is this?" I snapped. She just laughed that airy, fake laugh of hers, like I was being unreasonable. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "It's just a small wedding. We needed the perfect outdoor venue, and honestly, your yard was the best option. You should feel honored. The bride's family is very prestigious, you know." I felt like my blood was boiling. "Karen, this is my land," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite my fury. "You can't just set up a wedding here without my permission." Karen rolled her eyes like I was some kind of petulant child. "Oh, don't be silly," she said, flipping through her clipboard like she was reading from some imaginary rulebook. "The HOA guidelines allow for community events in appropriate locations. Besides, we tried reaching out to you, but you never answered your phone. That's because you never called me." I shouted, incredulity taking over. "You can't just decide to throw a wedding on someone else's private property." She shrugged like it was no big deal. "Technicalities, John," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You live here, don't you? That means you should contribute to the community. It's just one day. Stop making a fuss." Before I could respond, the bride and groom approached, grinning like everything was perfectly normal. The bride, a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, beamed at me. "Oh, you must be John? Thank you so much for letting us use your land. It's breathtaking." "I didn't let you use anything." I snapped, my fist clenching. "Karen set this up without even asking me." The groom, a smug-looking man in a suit that probably cost more than my entire house, chuckled. "Come on, man. No harm. No foul, right? It's just one day. Besides, we already paid for everything, and the guests are on their way." "You paid who?" I asked, my patience slipping faster than I could handle. Karen piped up, her voice dripping with condescension. "To the HOA, of course," she said with a smug smile. "A very reasonable fee, if I do say so myself." I was stunned into silence. She had not only stolen my land for this ridiculous event, but now she was profiting from it? I couldn't believe it. My land, my property, and she was acting like she was doing me a favor. Oh, and by the way, Karen added, flipping through her clipboard like it was just another day in the life of a professional thief. The catering trucks had trouble parking, so we had them use your driveway. Hope that's not a problem. Sure enough, when I looked over my driveway, it was completely blocked by multiple trucks, vans, and even a freaking limousine. There was no way I could get my own truck out if I needed to. My stomach twisted in anger. I took a deep breath, trying to control my rage. Move it, I said, lowering my voice so only Karen could hear. All of it. Now. Karen just scoffed. John, don't be unreasonable. The ceremony starts in an hour. Just go inside and relax. It'll all be over soon. No, I said firmly, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. You took over my land, you blocked my driveway, you're making money off my property, and you expect me to just relax while you and your entitled friends pretend in my backyard? She waved me off, already basking in the glow of her self-importance as she waved at arriving guests like she was the queen of the universe. The bride and groom, completely unfazed, went back to their preparations. I was livid, and I knew something had to change. I'd had enough. Karen and her wedding guests had crossed every line imaginable, and if they thought they could just keep walking all over me, they were dead wrong. After everything that happened, I couldn't just stand by and watch the chaos unfold like some helpless bystander. So I called my farmhand. Hey, open the back gate, I said, barely keeping my composure. Let them all out. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he laughed. All of them, he asked. Yeah, I replied, feeling a sick satisfaction at the thought of what was about to happen. Every single one. I hung up the phone and watched as the first cows started charging through the gate. There was no turning back now. Karen, the bride, and everyone else were about to get a crash course in how to handle a real farm experience. They were about to regret ever stepping foot on my property. The cows didn't waste any time. One moment, the air was filled with soft classical music from the string quartet, and the next, all hell broke loose. A loud, deep moo echoed across the yard, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy hooves pounding against the grass. I could hear the panicked screams of the guests as they saw the cows charging through the seating area. What the hell is happening? I heard someone shout as the cows trampled over the floral arrangements and knocked chairs to the ground like they were nothing. I couldn't help but grin. This was the kind of chaos I was hoping for. It was like the universe had finally decided to balance things out. For once, Karen was on the receiving end of the kind of mess she liked to create. And then it happened. Max, the biggest, meanest bull on the farm, made a beeline for the towering wedding cake. I could see him charging straight for it, and I almost felt bad for the poor thing. But only almost. Max smashed straight into the cake, sending layers of frosting and cake flying through the air like confetti. The bride's horrified scream echoed across the yard. No, not the cake, she shrieked. The groom, who had been standing proudly by the cake, jumped back just in time to avoid getting covered in frosting, but his overpriced suit was already covered in dirt from the cows. Karen, meanwhile, stood there in shock, her face going from confusion to rage in seconds. I could see the steam practically coming out of her ears. John, she screamed, her voice shrill. What the hell did you do? If the cows weren't enough, the goats decided to join the party. These little troublemakers darted through the yard like they were on a mission to destroy everything in sight. One of them jumped right onto the gift table, sending wedding presents flying in every direction. What the hell? Someone yelled as a goat knocked over the table, its hooves scattering envelopes and wrapping paper all over the grass. Another goat found its way onto the DJ's sound system, stomping all over the controls with glee. The classical music that had been playing so softly was now a distorted mess of sounds as the goat turned the sound system into its own personal playground. This is a disaster. I heard someone shout in the background. But honestly, I couldn't care less. The more chaos, the better. This was the price Karen had to pay for thinking she could control my life. And then there was Captain Quackers, my favorite troublemaker. This big, white goose had been wandering the yard, but when it saw the chaos unfolding, it decided to take matters into its own wings. With a loud, aggressive honk, it charged straight for the groom, nipping at his leg like it was going to win some kind of battle for territory. The groom let out a strangled yell, trying to push the goose away, but Captain Quackers wasn't having any of it. The bride, in her wedding dress, tried to step in, pulling at the goose in a desperate attempt to stop it from attacking. But instead of calming down, Captain Quackers only got angrier, flapping its wings even harder. "This is unbelievable," the groom shouted, brushing feathers off his suit. "Who lets farm animals loose at a wedding?" "Oh, you mean my animals?" I said, walking over with a grin plastered across my face. "Yeah, they're not big fans of trespassers." By now, everything was in total chaos. Guests were scrambling to find shelter. Some were perched on chairs, trying to avoid the cows, while others were trying to escape the goats and geese that were running amok. The bride was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching the shredded remains of her bouquet like it was her last lifeline. Karen, now completely red-faced and trembling with rage, spun around to face me. "You did this on purpose," she screeched. "You sabotaged this wedding." I stood there, enjoying the spectacle of her meltdown. "Oh, did I?" I said, pretending to look confused. "It looks to me like you're the one who decided to throw a wedding on someone else's property. Who exactly gave you permission for this, Karen?" Her mouth opened and closed, but there was no denying it anymore. She was defeated, her entire plan crumbling in front of her eyes. The guests were already starting to leave, many of them still covered in dirt, manure, and frosting. The wedding that she had worked so hard to ruin was now completely destroyed. "You're a joke, Karen," I muttered under my breath, feeling the satisfaction of watching her fail. The best part? She had no idea what was coming next. By the end of the day, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. The land was mine, and Karen's delusion was finally being exposed. She thought she could control everything, but she was about to learn the hard way that you can't mess with someone who's already been pushed to the edge. After the wedding turned into a disaster of epic proportions, I thought it was finally over. But Karen wasn't done yet. She was the type of person who couldn't accept defeat, and I knew she would try something else. Sure enough, I heard the sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. Great. Just what I needed. More of Karen's mess. The last thing I wanted was to deal with the police over her stupidity, but here we were. As the cops pulled up and stepped out of their patrol cars, Karen immediately jumped in front of them. Her face was a mix of panic and anger, and I could tell she was already preparing her poor me act. "You've got to arrest him," she screeched, pointing at me. "John's the one who let his animals loose and ruined everything." The officers just stood there, their expressions unreadable. I could feel the tension building. They weren't buying her act. One of the officers adjusted his hat, clearly unimpressed with the scene unfolding before him. He turned to me. "This your property?" he asked. I nodded, already knowing where this was going. "Yeah, it is." Karen's voice came again, this time even louder and more frantic. "He's lying. He planned all of this. He sabotaged the wedding, and now he's trying to blame it on me." The officer looked at her, then back at me. "So you didn't give permission for this event?" "Not at all," I replied, my patience wearing thin. This entire thing was Karen's doing. She thought she could use my land without asking me, and now she's trying to blame me for the mess she created. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the officer cut her off. "Ma'am, did you or anyone from the HOA get permission to host this event on this property?" "Well," Karen faltered. "We thought we could just use it for a day." "You thought? You don't get to think on someone else's property, especially when you're charging people for it," the officer said, his tone hardening. "Do you have any paperwork, any contract, any approval to host this event here?" Karen's face went pale. She stammered, but the words didn't come. The officer turned to the other one, shaking his head in disbelief. The second officer spoke up. "Looks like there's no record of any permission being given, and it seems like the event was unauthorized from the get-go." Karen's eyes darted around, searching for some way to escape the hole she had dug for herself. She glanced at the crowd, which had now gathered around, silently watching the drama unfold. The bride's father, looking furious and completely fed up, stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "We have all the receipts," he said, his voice dripping with anger. "The HOA took money for this event, and now look at what happened. My daughter's wedding is ruined, and we paid you all for this mess." "What?" Karen's voice cracked. "That's not. I didn't." "You didn't what?" The officer cut her off, raising an eyebrow. "You took money for a wedding on someone else's property and didn't even have permission to host it." The officer's words hit her like a slap in the face. Karen's face went from red to pale as she tried to find a way out, but there was no escape. She had dug herself too deep. At this point, it was clear Karen was cornered. The officers were no longer paying attention to her. The guests were starting to leave, shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The entire wedding was a disaster, and Karen had made it worse. Karen finally realized she wasn't going to talk her way out of this. Her voice wavered as she tried one last-ditch attempt to save face. I'll fix this," she said, but the words came out wrong, desperate. "We'll make it right. We'll pay for the damages." The officer didn't even look at her. "You should have thought about that before throwing a wedding on someone else's land without permission. You're lucky the only thing you're getting today is a lesson in trespassing. But I'm sure the bride and her family have other plans for you." Karen's shoulders sagged. The weight of her failure was finally sinking in, and there was no way to escape it. The officers exchanged looks, clearly done with the whole situation. "We're going to need to ask you some questions down at the station," one of the officers said to Karen, who now stood there like a deer in headlights, completely defeated. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. "You're not under arrest yet," the officer continued, "but you're being detained for questioning." Karen froze. Her entire facade of control had crumbled. It was over. The humiliation was complete. The officer looked at me one last time. "We'll need your statement too, sir. If you could stick around for a bit longer." I gave a quick nod, but in truth, I had seen enough. Karen's fate was sealed. The bride's family would get their money back. The HOA would be looking at a lawsuit, and Karen would be dealing with the consequences of her own stupidity. The sirens wailed in the distance as Karen was led away by the officers. I could hear her protesting all the way to the patrol car. "This isn't fair," she screamed. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching her get taken away. Honestly, it felt damn good. Karen had made my life miserable for far too long, thinking she could push me around because of her HOA title. Now she was paying the price for her entitlement." As the last of the guests left, the damage to the yard was clear. Chairs were overturned, decorations trampled, and the once beautiful space had been destroyed. But none of that mattered to me. Karen had ruined everything, and now she was going to pay for it. I walked away, the sound of the police car fading into the distance, knowing that Karen's reign was officially over. The community had finally seen her for what she truly was. Nothing more than a fraud, a liar, and a failed leader. I could only imagine what was coming next, but one thing was for sure. I would be ready. And as for Karen, well, she had no idea just how much worse things were about to get for her. After the disaster with the wedding, I thought Karen had finally learned her lesson. But no, if there's one thing I've learned about her, it's that she never gives up, especially when she's been humiliated. A few days after the wedding, I woke up to the sound of a car pulling into my driveway. Great, just what I needed, another confrontation with Karen. She had to be behind it. Sure enough, when I walked outside, I saw her standing next to two officials, her fake concerned citizen face plastered on, as usual. She wasn't done causing trouble. Now she was playing the "I'm just here to help the community" card. "Good morning, John," she said, trying to sound all sweet and innocent. "I'm just here to discuss some important matters about your property." I crossed my arms, already annoyed. "What now, Karen?" I asked, looking at her and the official she had brought with her. One of the men stepped forward, looking all official in his suit. "We've received several complaints regarding your property," he said, trying to sound all professional. "There are concerns about zoning violations and the disturbance your animals have caused." I couldn't believe this. The nerve of her. Zoning violations? I snapped. "Are you serious? I've owned this land for years, and I've never had a single problem. What's the real deal, Karen? Just because you're still mad about the wedding doesn't mean you can start making up lies. Karen, of course, jumped in. It's not personal, John, she said, in that fake sweet voice she always uses. It's just about maintaining the integrity of the community. You can't have farm animals running wild and disturbing the peace. People are concerned. I could see exactly what was going on here. Karen was trying to get back at me, using the HOA as her personal weapon. Yeah, sure. People are so concerned, they're complaining about cows and goats being too noisy, I said sarcastically. Just admit it, Karen. You're still pissed off because your little wedding didn't go the way you planned. The official, trying to hold some semblance of authority, cleared his throat. We just need to inspect the property to make sure everything is in compliance with local regulations, he said, ignoring my sarcasm completely. Fine, I said, rolling my eyes. Come on, take a look. Waste your time. I've got nothing to hide. I walked them around the property while Karen trailed behind, pointing at random things like she was trying to find something wrong. That barn, that fence, the water troughs, she said, as if any of it was an issue. It was clear she was just looking for a reason to make my life difficult. As we walked, I couldn't help but smirk. She looked so desperate. This was a waste of time, and I could see it in her face. She was starting to realize that nothing was wrong, but her ego wouldn't let her back down. The inspectors eventually returned to me after walking around for what felt like hours. They flipped through their notes, looking at me like they had nothing to report. One of them sighed and said, "Well, John, everything here seems to be in compliance. Your property is zoned for agricultural use, and your animals are well kept. There's no violation we can cite." Karen's face immediately turned red. But the noise, the smell, the disturbance, she spluttered. These animals are a menace. The inspector just shrugged. Ma'am, farm animals on a farm are not a violation. They're part of the business. There's nothing we can do about it. Karen's face twisted with frustration, but she wasn't done yet. What about the safety concerns? The goose attacked a guest. You mean Captain Quackers? I interjected with a grin. Yeah, he doesn't like trespassers. The inspectors exchanged a look, clearly unimpressed. Ma'am, animals are part of farm life. If there's nothing else, we'll be on our way. I could feel the victory slowly sinking in. Karen had nothing. She had spent all this time trying to find something wrong, but she had come up empty. It was clear to everyone now. Karen was just making trouble because she couldn't accept that she had failed. She was absolutely furious. You think you've won, don't you, John? She hissed, her hands clenched into fists. This isn't over. Yeah, sure, I said, already walking away. Keep telling yourself that, Karen. You've lost. Karen couldn't even respond. She just stood there, her face turning purple with rage. It was obvious she had no way out now, and I was relishing every moment of it. I thought it was over. But Karen wasn't just going to slink away quietly. She was going to go down swinging. As the inspectors left, she tried one last time to salvage her reputation with the HOA. You all can't just let John get away with this, she screamed at the board members. He's mocking everything we've worked for. The other HOA members, however, were done with her. They just stared at her, some of them shaking their heads in disbelief. One of them, an older woman, spoke up. Karen, you've lied to us. You've lied to the entire community. You've made us all look like fools. A man with glasses, who had been quiet up until now, spoke next. You've caused us legal trouble, stolen money from residents, and now you're trying to blame John. We can't let you keep your position after this. The look on Karen's face was priceless. She was cornered with nowhere left to hide. No, she said, shaking her head. You can't do this to me. I built this HOA. I've been the president for years. But no one was listening to her anymore. The votes to remove her started to take shape, and Karen, for the first time, looked defeated. As the meeting went on, she tried to argue, but her words were falling on deaf ears. It was clear Karen's time as HOA president was over. With a final, bitter look at me, Karen stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The HOA had finally turned on her, and she was out. No more lies. No more manipulation. That was a long time coming, I muttered to myself as I walked out of the room, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Karen was finally finished. It felt good to see Karen squirm, and even better to know that the community had finally seen her for what she truly was, a power-hungry liar. But as I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder, how long would it take before she tried something else? Whatever it was, I knew I'd be ready for her. The dust had barely settled from Karen's disastrous fall from grace when I got an unexpected knock on my door. At first, I figured it was another one of her pathetic attempts at revenge or manipulation. Sure enough, when I opened the door, there she was, standing with a sheepish look on her face, like she hadn't just tried to destroy my life. "John," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about everything. I had no idea the wedding wasn't actually authorized, and I honestly didn't mean for things to get so out of hand." I couldn't believe she had the audacity to stand there and pretend like she wasn't the one who caused the entire mess. "Yeah, no kidding," I shot back, barely hiding my disdain. "You thought you could use my property without permission, turn it into a circus, and then play the victim. You've destroyed everything you touched, Karen." She blinked, looking genuinely surprised that I wasn't buying her apology. I know, she said quickly, "but I swear I didn't realize it would go this far. I thought I was doing what was best for the community. Doing what was best." I laughed bitterly. "You've never cared about anyone but yourself, Karen. You've played everyone around you like puppets, and now you're trying to salvage your reputation? Nice try." But Karen wasn't done yet. She reached in her bag and pulled out an envelope. "Look, John," she said, practically shoving it at me. "This is for you, for the damage caused by the wedding. It's the least I can do." I looked at the envelope, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I realized this was nothing more than a pathetic bribe. She was trying to buy my forgiveness. "Let me guess," I said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "You're paying me off to forget about all the damage you've caused and all the lies you've told." "Sorry, but that's not going to cut it." Karen's face flushed red. "It's just a check, John," she muttered. "I didn't mean for everything to fall apart like this. I'm just trying to make things right." "Make things right?" I snapped, tossing the envelope back at her. "You can't make things right by throwing money at me. You've ruined the wedding, lied to everyone, and made my life a living hell. No check in the world will fix that." Karen, not one to give up easily, quickly shifted tactics. "Well, if you're not going to take the money, that's fine," she said, trying to sound casual. "But just know that my lawyer will be contacting you soon. We're suing you for the damages to my reputation and the cost of the wedding." I stared at her, incredulous. "You got to be kidding me. You're threatening me with a lawsuit? After everything you did? This is rich." She straightened up, trying to act all high and mighty. "I have every right to take legal action, John. You've embarrassed me, and now I'm going to make sure you pay for it." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Oh, I'm sure your lawyer is thrilled about wasting his time on this ridiculous case. Good luck with that, Karen. You're just digging yourself deeper. The only thing I'm guilty of is letting you make a fool out of me for far too long." I thought that was the end of it, but of course, Karen wasn't done. A few days later, I got another message, this time from one of the remaining HOA members. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight," it read. "Karen is losing control. Thought you'd like to know." Well. It seemed like the community was finally catching up to the truth. I didn't waste any time heading over to the meeting. As soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension in the room. Everyone was on edge. There was no more fake politeness, no forced smiles. Karen's grip on the HOA was slipping, and she knew it. As soon as she saw me, Karen shot me a glare that could have burned a hole through me. "This is your fault, John," she hissed, her face contorted in fury. "You've ruined everything. I'm trying to fix this, and you just won't let me." I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, enjoying the spectacle. "Me? Ruin things?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Karen, look around. You're the one who turned this HOA into a joke. You're the one who threw a wedding on my property, made money off it, and then played the victim when it all fell apart. You're the one who ruined everything." The meeting was a disaster for Karen. It quickly became clear that the rest of the HOA board was fed up with her. One by one, people started speaking up, accusing her of abusing her power, lying to residents, and causing more problems than she had ever solved. "You failed us, Karen," one man said. You've made this community toxic. You've taken our money, lied to us, and caused irreparable damage. Karen tried to argue, but it was over. She was out. The vote came fast and hard. I vote to remove Karen as president, someone said, and the room echoed with agreement. Karen's face turned ashen. You can't do this to me, she stammered, her voice cracking. I built this HOA. I've been the president for years. You've destroyed it, Karen, another woman replied coldly. And now it's time for you to go. Karen looked around the room, desperate for support, but it was clear no one was on her side anymore. The HOA had finally had enough. The vote was unanimous. Karen was removed as president, and with it, her reign of terror over the community was over. She left the meeting in a huff, slamming the door behind her, but there was no escaping the truth. Her time was up. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, I didn't have to worry about her scheming or trying to control my life. The HOA was finally free from her grasp, and the community could breathe again. But Karen's defeat wasn't the end of the story. No, she was going to have to face the consequences of her actions. The community had already turned its back on her, and I was certain the lawsuit she threatened would go nowhere. She was out of options, and for the first time, it felt like the world was finally turning in my favor. As I walked out of the meeting, I knew things were about to change. Karen was finished, and whatever she tried next, I was ready for it. This time, it wasn't just about my land. It was about reclaiming my peace, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me.